Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Marco stirred, his eyes fluttering open as the events of the previous day came rushing back. The newspaper article, the ballet review, and most importantly, that damning photograph of him dressed as one of the female leads in a past production. His stomach churned with anxiety as he contemplated the potential fallout. Reluctantly, he dragged himself out of bed and shuffled to the bathroom. As he splashed cold water on his face, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Dark circles underscored his eyes, a testament to the restless night he'd endured. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Downstairs, his mother was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toast filled the air. She turned as Marco entered, her smile faltering slightly as she noted his haggard appearance. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Marco shrugged, slumping into a chair at the kitchen table. "Not really," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother's brow furrowed with concern. She set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him, then took a seat across the table. "Is this about the article?" she asked gently. Marco nodded, pushing the food around his plate with his fork. "I can't stop thinking about it. What if someone at school sees it? What if they recognize me?" His mother reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Marco, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Your performance was beautiful, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." He managed a weak smile, grateful for her support, but unconvinced. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know if I'm ready for everyone to know." She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Now, eat up. You have dance class this afternoon, remember?" Marco's heart sank. He'd almost forgotten about the lesson. After everything that had happened, the thought of putting on his dance clothes and facing his mother as an instructor seemed daunting. But he knew how much it meant to her, how proud she was to teach him. He couldn't let her down. With a resigned sigh, he picked up his fork and began to eat. The day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Every glance, every whisper in the hallways at school set Marco on edge. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone brandishing the newspaper article and pointing at him accusingly. By the time the final bell rang, Marco's nerves were frayed. He hurried to his locker, eager to grab his dance bag and escape before anyone could corner him. As he rounded the corner, his heart nearly stopped. Leaning against his locker, a smirk playing on her lips, was his ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. She held up a copy of the newspaper, her perfectly manicured nail tapping the photograph that had haunted Marco's thoughts. "Well, well, well," she drawled, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "If it isn't the prima ballerina himself." Marco froze, his throat constricting as he struggled to form words. "Vanessa, She cut him off with a laugh. "Save it, Marco. I always knew there was something different about you. I just never expected this." She waved the newspaper in front of his face. Heat rushed to Marco's cheeks as he snatched the paper from her grasp. "It's not what you think," he hissed, glancing around to ensure no one else was within earshot. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Oh? So, you're not prancing around in tutus and tiaras? Because that's certainly what it looks like to me." Marco's fists clenched at his sides, crumpling the newspaper. "It was for a performance," he ground out. "It doesn't mean anything." She leaned in close, her breath hot against his ear. "Keep telling yourself that, sweetie. But don't worry, your secret's safe with me." She pulled back, her eyes glinting with mischief. For now, at least. With a final smirk, Vanessa sauntered away, leaving Marco trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. He yanked open his locker, shoving the crumpled newspaper inside before grabbing his dance bag. As he slammed the door shut, he caught sight of his reflection in the small mirror he'd hung inside. The face that stared back at him was a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, and unmistakably afraid. He took a shaky breath, willing his racing heart to slow. He couldn't let Vanessa get to him. He had to focus on his dance lesson. With renewed determination, Marco shouldered his bag and headed for the exit. He had barely made it 3 steps when a familiar voice called out behind him, "Hey, Marco, wait up!" He turned to see his best friend, Tom, jogging towards him. Tom's easy smile faltered as he took in Marco's tense posture and clenched jaw. "Whoa, you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marco forced a weak laugh. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just stressed about this dance lesson." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Dance lesson? Since when do you take dance lessons?" Marco's stomach dropped. In his panic over the article, he'd completely forgotten that he hadn't told Tom about resuming lessons with his mother. It's a new thing," he stammered. "My mom's teaching me. You know, family bonding and all that." Tom nodded slowly, though his expression remained skeptical. "Right. Well, good luck with that, I guess. Want to grab a burger after? We could hit up that new place on Main Street." Marco shook his head, relief washing over him at the change of subject. "Can't today, sorry. Maybe this weekend." "Sure thing. Catch you later then." As Tom walked away, Marco let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He hated lying to his best friend, but the thought of explaining everything, the lessons, the performance, the article, was too overwhelming. With a heavy heart, he pushed through the school doors and headed towards the dance studio. The familiar scent of rosin and sweat greeted Marco as he entered the studio. His mother was already there, stretching at the bar. She smiled warmly as he approached. "There's my star pupil," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Ready to work on those pirouettes?" Marco managed a small smile in return, dropping his bag in the corner. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. As they began the warm-up routine, Marco found himself slowly relaxing. The familiar movements, the soothing classical music playing softly in the background, it all served to push the day's worries to the back of his mind. For a brief, blissful moment, he was just a dancer, focused solely on the art of movement. But reality came crashing back as they moved on to more complex routines. His mother demonstrated a series of intricate steps, her movements fluid and graceful. When it was Marco's turn to try, he stumbled, his usual poise deserting him. "It's okay, sweetheart," his mother reassured him. "Take a deep breath and try again." Marco nodded, closing his eyes and inhaling deeply. As he exhaled, he imagined all his fears and anxieties flowing out with his breath. When he opened his eyes, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. For a split second, he saw himself as others might, a boy in dance clothes, attempting moves traditionally associated with female dancers. The image of himself in the newspaper flashed through his mind, and he faltered again. His mother's hand on his shoulder brought him back to the present. "What's wrong, Marco?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "You seem distracted today." He turned to face her, the words he'd been holding back all day suddenly spilling out. "I can't do this, Mom, not anymore. What if someone finds out? What if they think I'm weird?" His mother's expression softened. She guided him to the bench along the wall, sitting down beside him. "Marco, listen to me. There is nothing weird about expressing yourself through dance. It takes strength, discipline, and incredible artistry, all qualities you possess in abundance." Marco shook his head, unconvinced. "But the costumes, the roles, it's not normal for a guy to do that stuff." "Normal is overrated," his mother said firmly. "Throughout history, some of the most celebrated male dancers have performed roles that challenged gender norms. Vaslav Nijinsky, Rudolf Nureyev, Mikhail Baryshnikov, these men revolutionized ballet and were revered for their talent, not ridiculed for their choices." She took his hands in hers, her gaze intense. "You have a gift, Marco. Don't let fear or narrow-minded opinions rob you of the joy dance brings you. Be proud of who you are and what you can do." Marco felt a lump form in his throat, touched by his mother's words. He squeezed her hands, managing a watery smile. Thanks, Mom. I'll try. She pulled him into a tight hug. That's all I ask. Now, shall we try that routine again? With renewed determination, Marco stood and walked back to the center of the studio. As he moved through the steps, he focused on the feeling of freedom that dance had always given him. For the first time that day, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The next few days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Marco found himself jumping at every sudden noise, flinching whenever someone laughed near him. He was certain that at any moment the entire school would erupt in jeers and taunts, brandishing copies of the damning newspaper article. But as the days wore on and nothing happened, Marco began to relax slightly. Perhaps Vanessa had kept her word after all. Maybe the article had gone unnoticed by his classmates. He dared to hope that the whole incident might blow over without further drama. That hope was shattered on Friday afternoon. Marco was at his locker, exchanging his textbooks for his weekend homework, when he heard a commotion down the hall. A group of students was huddled around something, their excited whispers carrying through the corridor. His curiosity piqued, Marco cautiously approached the group. As he drew nearer, he caught snippets of their conversation. No way, that can't be him! I always thought he was kind of weird, but this... Who knew Marco had it in him? His blood ran cold. Pushing through the crowd, he saw what had captured everyone's attention. Taped to the wall was a blown-up copy of the newspaper article, with Marco's image circled in bright red marker. Scrawled beneath it in large letters were the words, Marco's secret life? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marco stumbled backward, his vision blurring as panic set in. He barely registered the looks of shock and amusement on his classmates' faces as he turned and ran, desperate to escape the suddenly suffocating hallway. He burst through the school doors, gulping in lungfuls of fresh air. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Who had done this? Vanessa, one of her friends. It didn't matter. The damage was done. As he stood there, trying to calm his racing heart, a hand clapped down on his shoulder. Marco whirled around to find Tom standing there, concern etched across his features.
Marco, what the hell was that about?
Tom asked, his voice low and urgent. Is it true? Are you really... He trailed off, seemingly unable to finish the question. Marco's shoulders slumped in defeat. There was no point in lying anymore.
It's not what you think,
he said wearily.
I don't...
He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts. I dance, okay? And sometimes in performances I play female roles. That's all. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he spoke. Why didn't you tell me? The hurt in his friend's voice was like a knife to Marco's heart. I was scared, he admitted. I thought you'd think I was a freak or something. To Marco's surprise, Tom's expression softened.
Marco, you're my best friend. I don't care if you dance or wear tutus or whatever. I just wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me.
Relief washed over Marco, bringing with it a fresh wave of emotion. He blinked back tears, offering Tom a shaky smile.
I'm sorry. I should have known better.
Tom pulled him into a brief, tight hug. It's okay, man. We'll get through this together, all right? As they pulled apart, Marco noticed a crowd forming at the school entrance. Students were pouring out, many of them pointing and whispering in his direction. His moment of relief evaporated, replaced by a fresh surge of anxiety. What am I going to do? He muttered, more to himself than to Tom. Tom's jaw set in determination.
We're going to face this head on, he declared. No more hiding, no more secrets. You're a dancer and you're damn good at it. It's time everyone knew that. Marco looked at his friend in disbelief. Are you crazy? They'll eat me alive.
Tom shook his head.
Not if we don't let them. Come on, I have an idea.
Before Marco could protest, Tom was dragging him back towards the school. As they pushed through the crowd, Marco could hear the whispers intensify. He kept his eyes fixed on the ground. unable to meet the curious and judgmental gazes of his peers. Tom led him straight to the principal's office, ignoring the secretary's protests as he barged through the door. Principal Chen looked up from her desk, startled by their abrupt entrance. "Thomas, Marco, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, rising from her chair. Tom stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. "Mrs. Chen, we need your help. Someone's been bullying Marco, spreading private information about him without his consent.
We want to put a stop to it." Principal Chen's stern expression softened slightly as she turned her gaze to Marco. "Is this true, Marco?" Marco nodded, finding his voice. "Yes, ma'am. Someone put up a picture of me from a dance performance. They're making assumptions and spreading rumors." The principal's lips thinned into a tight line. "I see. This is a serious matter indeed. Bullying and invasion of privacy are not tolerated at this school." She paused, considering.
"What would you like to see happen, Marco?" Marco hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He looked to Tom, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Marco squared his shoulders and met Principal Chen's gaze.
"I want a chance to explain myself. To everyone. Maybe if they understand, they'll stop judging me." A small smile tugged at the corner of Principal Chen's mouth. "That's very brave of you, Marco. I think we can arrange something. How about an assembly on Monday morning?"
Marco's stomach churned at the thought of addressing the entire school, but he knew it was his best chance to take control of the narrative. "Okay," he agreed, his voice barely above a whisper. Principal Chen nodded decisively. "Very well. I'll make the arrangements. In the meantime, I'll have the offensive material removed from the hallways. Is there anything else you need?" Marco shook his head, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Tom spoke up.
"We'll be okay, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for your help."
As they left the office, Marco felt a mixture of relief and terror. The immediate crisis had been averted, but now he faced an even greater challenge, bearing his soul to the entire student body. Tom seemed to sense his friend's apprehension.
"Hey, it's going to be okay,"
he said, giving Marco's shoulder a reassuring squeeze.
"You've got the whole weekend to prepare, and I'll help you every step of the way." Marco managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Tom. I don't know what I'd do without you."
As they walked out of the school, the crowd had mostly dispersed, though Marco could still feel curious eyes following him. He tried to stand tall, drawing strength from Tom's unwavering support. "So, what now?" Tom asked as they reached the parking lot. Marco took a deep breath, his mind racing. "Now," he said, a hint of determination creeping into his voice. "I think it's time for you to see what all this fuss is about. Want to come to my dance lesson?" Tom's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he grinned.
"Absolutely. Lead the way, Baryshnikov."
As they walked towards the dance studio, Marco felt a small spark of hope ignite in his chest. He had no idea what Monday would bring, but for the first time since this whole ordeal began, he felt ready to face it head-on. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Marco spent hours with Tom and his mother, crafting his speech for the assembly. They debated every word, every gesture, trying to strike the perfect balance between honesty and self-preservation. In between writing sessions, Marco threw himself into his dance practice with renewed vigor. If he was going to put himself out there, he was determined to show everyone exactly why dance meant so much to him. By Sunday evening, Marco felt as ready as he could be. His speech was memorized, his dance routine perfected. Still, as he lay in bed that night, sleep eluded him. His mind raced with all the possible outcomes of the next day. What if they laughed at him? What if his words fell on deaf ears? What if this only made things worse? He tossed and turned, the questions swirling in his head like a relentless storm. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that exhaustion finally claimed him, granting him a few fitful hours of sleep. Monday dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to Marco's turbulent emotions. He dressed with care, choosing clothes that were comfortable yet presentable. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized the determined young man looking back at him. His mother drove him to school, the car ride passing in tense silence. As they pulled up to the entrance, she turned to him, her eyes shining with pride and concern. "Remember, Marco," she said softly. "No matter what happens in there, I am so, so proud of you. You are brave and talented and kind, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." Marco felt a lump form in his throat. He leaned over and hugged his mother tightly. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, "for everything." Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and walked towards the school entrance. Tom was waiting for him at the top of the steps, a supportive smile on his face.
"Ready for this?"
Tom asked as Marco approached. Marco nodded, his jaw set with determination.
"As ready as I'll ever be."
Together they walked into the school and headed for the auditorium. The halls were eerily quiet, all the students already gathered for the assembly. As they neared the auditorium doors, Marco could hear the low buzz of hundreds of voices on the other side. Principal Chen met them at the entrance. "Are you prepared, Marco?" she asked kindly. Marco nodded, his throat suddenly too dry for words. "Very well," she said. "I'll introduce you, and then the floor is yours." As Principal Chen stepped onto the stage, Marco felt his heart begin to race. This was it. There was no turning back now. He heard Principal Chen's voice, muffled through the curtain.
"Students, we have a special assembly this morning. One of your classmates, Marco Delgado, has asked for the opportunity to address you all. I expect you to listen respectfully and with open minds."
There was a smattering of whispers and then silence. Marco took one last deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "You've got this," Tom whispered, giving him a thumbs up. Marco stepped out from behind the curtain and walked to the center of the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded him, but as his eyes adjusted, he could make out the sea of faces staring back at him. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger with each word.
"Most of you probably know why I'm up here today. You've seen the article, the picture, you've heard the rumors. Well, I'm here to set the record straight."
He paused, scanning the audience.
In the front row, he spotted Vanessa, her arms crossed and a smirk playing on her lips.
The sight of her nearly made him falter, but he pressed on.
"Yes, I dance. Yes, sometimes that involves costumes that might seem unusual for a guy, but here's what you don't know. Dance is my passion. It's not just a hobby or a phase. It's a part of who I am."
He took a step forward, his voice growing more confident.
"When I dance, I'm free. I can express myself in ways that words could never capture. It challenges me physically and mentally. It pushes me to be better, to reach higher, to dream bigger." As he spoke, Marco could see some of the hostile expressions softening, replaced by looks of curiosity and even admiration.
"I know some of you might not understand. You might think it's weird or wrong for a guy to dance, especially in roles traditionally played by women. But let me ask you this. Is it wrong for a girl to play sports? To pursue a career in science or technology? Of course not. So why should it be any different for a boy who wants to dance?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not asking you to like what I do.
I'm not even asking you to understand it. All I'm asking is for the chance to be myself without fear of judgment or ridicule."
Marco took a deep breath, preparing for his final words.
"And to those of you who might be hiding your own passions out of fear, don't. Life is too short to let others dictate what you can or can't do. Be brave, be yourself, and never, ever let anyone make you feel ashamed of what you love."
As he finished speaking, the auditorium was silent. For a heart-stopping moment, Marco thought he had failed. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. The applause spread, growing louder and louder until the entire auditorium was filled with the sound. Marco felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. He had faced his fears and spoken his truth. As he looked out at the cheering crowd, he caught sight of Tom in the wings, grinning from ear to ear and giving him a thumbs up. Principal Chen stepped back onto the stage, placing a hand on Marco's shoulder. "Thank you, Marco, for your courage and honesty. I hope your classmates will take your words to heart." As Marco left the stage, he was immediately engulfed in a bear hug from Tom. "You did it, man!" Tom exclaimed. "That was amazing!" Marco grinned, still riding the high of the moment. As they made their way out of the auditorium, several students approached him, offering words of support and admiration. Even a few who had been among his harshest critics seemed to have had a change of heart. As the day progressed, Marco found himself the center of attention, but not in the way he had feared. People were curious, asking genuine questions about his dancing and his experiences. He answered as honestly as he could, feeling a sense of relief with each conversation. By the time the final bell rang, Marco felt like a different person. The weight of secrecy and fear that had been crushing him for so long had lifted. He walked out of the school with his head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As he stepped into the sunlight, he saw his mother waiting for him, a proud smile on her face. He ran to her, wrapping her in a tight hug. "I did it, Mom," he whispered. "I really did it." She pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. "I never doubted you for a second, my brave boy. Now what do you say we celebrate with some ice cream before dance class?" Marco grinned. "That sounds perfect." As they walked to the car, Marco felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, people who wouldn't understand or accept him. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly, authentically himself. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes for Marco. The school buzzed with talk of his speech, and while not everyone was supportive, the overwhelming response was positive. He found himself surrounded by a new circle of friends who admired his courage and were genuinely interested in his passion for dance. Even more surprising was the impact his words had on others. Several students approached him privately, sharing their own hidden talents and interests they'd been afraid to pursue. A shy boy from his math class revealed his love for painting. A tough-looking girl from the soccer team confided her secret desire to learn the violin. Marco listened to each of them, offering encouragement and support, just as Tom had done for him. His dance lessons took on a new energy. Free from the burden of secrecy, Marco threw himself into his training with renewed vigor. His mother noticed the change, beaming with pride as she watched him master increasingly complex routines. One afternoon, as they were cooling down after a particularly grueling session, his mother broached a subject that made Marco's heart skip a beat. "The winter showcase is coming up," she said casually, stretching her arms above her head. "I think you're ready for a solo performance." Marco froze, a mixture of excitement and terror coursing through him. "A solo? Are you sure?" His mother nodded, her eyes twinkling. "Absolutely. You've come so far, Marco. It's time to show everyone what you can really do." The idea both thrilled and terrified him. A solo performance meant putting himself out there in a way he never had before. But as he thought about it, he realized that's exactly what he'd been doing ever since that assembly. Why stop now? "Okay," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Let's do it." The next few weeks were a blur of intense rehearsals. Marco worked tirelessly, perfecting every movement, every expression. His mother pushed him harder than ever before, but he welcomed the challenge. This was his chance to prove to himself and everyone else that he belonged on that stage. As the day of the showcase approached, word spread through the school. To Marco's surprise, many of his classmates expressed interest in attending. Even Vanessa, who had been notably quiet since the assembly, approached him one day after class. "So," she said, an unreadable expression on her face. "I heard you're performing in the showcase." Marco tensed, waiting for the sarcastic comment or cutting remark. Instead, Vanessa's face softened slightly. "I'll be there," she said simply before turning and walking away. The night of the showcase arrived, and Marco found himself pacing backstage, his stomach a knot of nerves. He was dressed in a costume of deep blue, the fabric shimmering under the lights. As he peered through the curtain, he saw the auditorium was packed. In the front row, he spotted his mother, Tom, and, to his shock, a large group of his classmates, including Vanessa. A hand on his shoulder made him jump. He turned to see his dance instructor, an older woman named Miss Rossi, smiling at him. "You're going to be wonderful, Marco," she said warmly. "Just remember, when you're out there, it's just you and the music. Nothing else matters." Marco nodded, taking a deep breath. As he heard his name announced, he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. For a heartbeat, he froze, overwhelmed by the sea of faces staring back at him. Then the music began, a haunting melody that seemed to flow through him. Marco closed his eyes, letting the notes wash over him. When he opened them again, he was no longer Marco, the high school student, but Marco, the dancer. He began to move, his body flowing with the music as if they were one. Every leap, every turn, every graceful gesture told a story, his story, of struggle, of fear, of hiding, and finally of triumph and self-acceptance. As he danced, the world fell away. There was no audience, no judgment, no fear. There was only the music, the movement, and the pure joy of expression. Before he knew it, the music was fading, and he struck his final pose. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. Marco blinked, coming back to himself, and saw the entire audience on their feet. His eyes found his mother in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she clapped and cheered. Next to her, Tom was whooping and pumping his fist in the air. And there, a few seats down, was Vanessa, a look of awe on her face as she applauded with the rest. As Marco took his bow, he felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This was why he danced. This feeling of connection, of touching others through his art. It was worth every struggle, every moment of doubt. After the showcase, Marco was swarmed by well-wishers. His classmates crowded around him, offering congratulations and expressing their amazement at his performance. Even those who had once mocked him were now looking at him with newfound respect. Vanessa approached him last, hanging back until the crowd had thinned. "Marco," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "That was incredible. I had no idea you could dance like that." Marco felt a rush of conflicting emotions, pride, vindication, and a touch of lingering hurt. But as he looked at Vanessa's sincere expression, he found he couldn't hold on to any bitterness. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'm glad you came." She nodded, looking like she wanted to say more, but instead just gave him a small smile before disappearing into the crowd. As the excitement of the evening began to wind down, Marco found himself alone with his mother and Tom. His mother pulled him into a fierce hug, her voice choked with emotion as she whispered how proud she was. Tom clapped him on the back, grinning from ear to ear. "So," Tom said as they walked out of the auditorium, "I guess this means we'll be seeing a lot more of Marco the dancer, huh?" Marco laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. "Yeah, I guess so. Think you can handle it?" Tom threw an arm around his shoulders. "Bring it on, Twinkle Toes. Just promise me one thing. Next time, you've got to teach me some of those moves." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.